What is up, amigos? Today we have the aerodynamics of Croatia, and this comes at the request of one of you amigos, Michael HR. Thank you. And Croatia is like this C-shape pattern. And one interesting fact about Croatia is that the Croatians love to walk. And some of the more avid walkers in Croatia walk upwards of 20 meters per day. And it's not uncommon when you have a group of friends and they're trying to decide how to get to a restaurant, for example. One friend will exclaim, "Let's walk," and then everyone else will cheer in excitement. And back in 2017, local man Peter Janovic walked his way into our hearts when he set the world record for longest distance walked, 37.4 meters. When interviewed about it later, he said that he wanted to give up at meter 34, but then he didn't. And to commemorate this massive achievement, the president of Croatia gave him the official nickname Sir Walks a Lot. And to this day, parents use this nickname to encourage their children in walking, often saying to them, "You're becoming a little Sir Walks a Lot, aren't you?" So we have the aerodynamics here of Croatia. We have 5 cut planes downstream, and the first cut plane mimics the geometry of Croatia quite nicely. You can see that it follows the fairly C-shaped pattern. However, it blows out quite a lot over the top. And when we get to the second plane, it has sort of lost its geometry quite quickly. It's almost blobby now. And that's quite surprising that it's done this so quickly. This indicates that the wake is fairly unstable and it's going to break down very quickly. That's often an indication that there's not really a lot of very strong three-dimensional flows. It's not very coherent, and that's often an indication of potentially low drag, but we'll see more about this later. Also, compared to other countries often showed that there was a little bit more of an unsteady flow closer to the country than this one. We really only get the really unsteadiness at about plane 3 and onwards, whereas some other countries have shown it from plane 2 and onwards. So that indicates that this is not showing as much of a periodic flow potentially. Now we have the subdrag plotted, and the subdrag follows a very similar shape to the wake itself. Like you can see that there is this C-shape plane to begin with, then downstream it becomes quite blobby, and then it mimics the planes quite well, the geometries. This indicates that probably the most of the drag coming from this object is coming from the pressure drag. So that indicates that the pressure upstream is much greater compared to pressure downstream of the country. And the skin friction drag is probably not that much, considering that this is quite a small shape. And the vortex drag, there'd probably be a little bit here because there are some jagged edges, but predominantly is coming from the profile drag and the pressure drag in particular. Now we have a Y-plane going right on the edge of the top part of the C kind of geometry of Croatia. And we have the wake effectively being plotted here. And this little part here makes a significantly bigger wake than you'd expect. So you can see how down the flow actually goes. And I can tell you here that the flow goes down at an angle, and that indicates that the lift coefficient being produced is positive. And indeed it is. It's 0.098. which is quite a decent lift coefficient. So it means that it's producing quite a bit of lift. It's trying to elevate off the ground perhaps. And that's partly because of this part here where the flow is going down, but also the rest of the geometry, which we'll see in the next few videos. But I'm just quite impressed with how big the wake is behind this small part of the end of that C geometry. Now moving in a little bit further, we have the top part and the bottom part of the C now. And there's a pretty decent gap between these two peninsulas effectively. Despite that, you can see that the wake does become very big, not very far downstream. So to begin with, there's obviously flow going through this peninsula bit, this little opening. But it doesn't take too long before both wakes from the top and bottom merge and makes a much bigger wake, a mega wake if you will. And this is the subdrag plotted here, and it mimics the regular wake quite well, which indicates that most of the drag is probably coming from the profile drag, not from the vortex drag. And these two peninsulas, again, they're producing a lot more drag than what you'd expect. What the drag coefficient is, we'll see at the end where we can rank Croatia against the other countries that we've done so far. There might be a bit of surprise here. Now we're a little bit further in. This is actually quite close to where Croatia meets the ocean. And we've seen it in a few other cases, for example, the Netherlands, where the peninsulas often do the damage in terms of the wake. For example, here, we are on pretty much a regular landmass. There's not these little bits coming off. It's just a regular landmass. And the wake, okay, it's pretty big, but it's not nearly as big as what the wake is from those two little peninsulas that we saw before, which are much thinner in terms of cross-sectional area than this area here. Also, this wake is not nearly as bad. We can see that quite close to the landmass. the velocity is still pretty high. It's not very low. It's not very blue. There's a little bit of aqua in there, even a bit of green, you might say. So it's really the peninsulas that do the damage in terms of the drag coefficient, which we'll see in a little bit, of these countries. It's often not the regular landmass itself. And this shows what I was saying before, where we moved a little bit further out now. We have a tiny little peninsula. It's not very big in terms of its cross-sectional area, but look at how big the wake is coming off of it. And the wake is fairly strong. Like there's a lot of blue there. There's not a lot of aqua, not a lot of green there. So it's quite a bad wake. Again, these peninsulas are the things that are increasing the drag of a country. So if you want to make a country more aerodynamic, it seems like we want to reduce these number of peninsulas that we have. Now we have a Z-plane which is going through like the southern tip of Croatia, and this is quite amazing. So the geometry here, like the wake blows out more towards the upper part of the screen than the bottom part. This indicates that at this point in the geometry, that the geometry is producing quite a bit of side force. Now we have a Z-plane which is right in the middle of Croatia, so in between those two peninsulas, they're making that C pattern, and just below the other peninsula on the west side of Croatia. And the wake here is not too bad. Like, okay, there is quite a bit of blue, but there is also quite a bit of green and aqua, which indicates that the wake is not that intense. That indicates that the drag is probably not as bad as what it could be. So let's look at the total drag now. So the total drag is not great, but it's not too bad either. So we do have some regions of quite red flow, but other regions where it's like even yellow, which indicates that the drag coefficient is not that bad here. And we have a Z plane, which is almost at the very top of Croatia, and there's almost no landmass here. But look how big the wake is coming off of this thing. So that peninsula there is producing quite a big wake. However, it's not that intense. So we can see that the color is more like around the blue kind of area. There's a little bit of dark blue, but also a little bit of green as well. So that's not as intense as what it could be. Let's look at the drag coefficient. Drum roll, please. And Croatia has a drag coefficient of only 0.79. It beats all the other countries we've done so far by like 25, 30%, even 40%. So why is this? One major reason is because even though there was quite a big wake in a lot of regions, as we mentioned, it wasn't as intense as what it could be. So there was a lot of light blue and even green areas in terms of the velocity, so it's not too bad. Even still, this indicates that Croatia is incredibly aerodynamic compared to the other countries. And amigo Marco HR suggested that this might be the case. I wasn't quite sure because there were quite a few peninsulas on Croatia, which did increase the drag in some regions. But overall, Croatia is a very aerodynamic country. The drag coefficient is very low, and literally Croatia is saying to everyone else, we rule the world, you're just living in it right now. So that's the end of this podcast, of any of this simulation, sorry, I got ahead of myself. If you liked it, make sure to like. If you want to see more like this, subscribe. And if you want us to do any other countries, let us know. We have a bit of a catalog going on. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace out, amigos.